We've reached the end of my top 200 favorite video games of all time. We are now in the top 25, the very last video, so it's time to upgrade from Saiyan to Super Saiyan. Now we're ready to embark on the final leg of this journey. This has been the longest video series I've ever done, both in terms of how long it's taken me to complete this and the final product, and I really hope you guys are enjoying this. I had a lot of fun doing it. It's fun going down memory lane and really thinking about of the hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of games I've played over the years. What are my absolute favorites? Boiling it down to a top 200, now we're all the way down to the top 25, the games that are closest to my heart, the games that really show who I am as a fan of video games. Starting off with number 25, more PS2 love. Another one of those games I wish I had my childhood copy of here. We have The Legend of Dragoon. I absolutely love this. This game was incredibly special to me from the start. Even if it was an awful game, I would still have a special memory of it because my best friend in the early days of elementary school, and his dad was a great influence on my life, and he's since passed on, and he was mostly a fantasy book cover artist and just an incredible artist. He did art for EverQuest. He did so much beautiful artwork and such a beautiful creative individual, and he introduced me to Dungeons and Dragons. I mean, he was such a tremendous influence on my life, and as far as my interest in mythology, my interest in fantasy, my interest in science fiction, a lot of that came from my experience with him. They moved across the country to Arizona, and we got, as a special treat one summer during middle school, got to go over there for, I think it was 2 weeks. I went over, and his older brother Nick had a friend come over, and we were just all over. It was a special thing because they had just moved, and I spent just a beautiful time there with them. I really miss that family and my memories with that family. And it had been just a month or so past my birthday at that point, so his mom decided to give me a birthday present when I got there, and this had just come out, The Legend of Dragoon. I think it had been literally just a couple months old at that point. So she got me The Legend of Dragoon for my birthday on that visit, and I'll never forget that. And that's the main reason why I wish I had that childhood copy still of that game, just because the copy of that game is just as special as the game itself for me, and the memories attached to it. But you know, c'est la vie, you know, life goes on, whatever. But The Legend of Dragoon, the actual game itself, is still such a remarkable experience. I know it's kind of a love-hate thing for a lot of people. Some people think it's just cliched to a negative extent, and some people just absolutely admire this game as much as I do. To me, even though there is a cliched, some people call it Power Rangers element, but I call it more, I think it's more of I don't know, just to me it's more of a classic feel to the way the different Dragoon characters are collected. And yeah, sure, you have like the Red Ranger, the Black Ranger, the Purple, you know, Ranger kind of thing, but I actually really like it. I think that's part of the charm, the way it's pulled off. I love the story and the world that was created. It's one of the most beautiful games on the system. I mean, easily it's like graphically one of the most impressive when you get into the cutscenes for that time. It really shows off the artistry, and that's usually the best cutscenes in a PS1 game, which was a bigger deal back then to have those cinematic moments. It really the best ones have great direction, directed in the way a great movie would be directed, in these small snippets of story, and they have to be used properly, and they have to really show the detail of the artistry, just in a greater artistic vision that really adds to the look and feel of the rest of the game, and this does that so well. It's just a remarkable experience from that perspective. I will never forget these characters. They just hold a special place in my heart, and that experience of I think just the personal involvement of why I got the game involved me more in the actual story as it went along. And it has one of my favorite combat mechanics too, and like the quick time button presses during combat is so much fun, and that battle music will stick in my head forever. I love so much about it, transforming into the Dragoons and the healing while you're guarding and adding different layers of strategy as you're playing. It's just so much fun. One of my favorite RPGs just to get in random encounters with, and a lot of great boss fights, and just the story in the world in RPG is the most important thing, and this to me, it really just holds together and is a very memorable game in so many ways. And I love even the Dragoon color thing. I love that because it adds such a vibrancy to the world. That's one thing that I remember, is that it being such a beautiful, colorful experience, and I really like that in an RPG. It just feels saturated with quality images, and it's just such a fun game to play. Speaking of games with beautiful visuals and a classic style that will never go away, we have Chrono Trigger here at number 24. This is the Chronicles version here because I'd only played a little bit of it on the Super Nintendo. I was a Genesis guy. The only Super Nintendo RPG that I played the whole way through during the time that it had been out was Final Fantasy VI. Trigger, my experiences were playing it bits and pieces at a friend's house and watching them play it, but it's the kind of game where you don't really get the full experience until you play through the whole thing yourself. So really my love is the memories of the PlayStation version, getting it. That was the first time that I fully had a chance to play through the entire game as someone who didn't own a Super Nintendo back in the day. And it lived up to all my expectations because it was one of those games that I was a little bit afraid that it was overhyped to the point that it just wasn't going to live up to it in playing it, but it absolutely did. It's one of the greatest RPGs ever made. It still is. It's just such a remarkable achievement. I can't imagine just sitting playing that for the first time. If I had been a little bit younger and played it on the Super Nintendo, it might have been a little bit even higher on this list. But my 24th, favorite game of all time. I absolutely adore Chrono Trigger. I really want to play the DS version. A lot of people say that that's sort of the definitive one now. I'm still looking for that. Haven't found it for a decent price though. But for now, the PS1 version of Chrono Trigger is my 24th favorite game of all time. One though that slightly edges it out, and depending on who you are, this might be a controversial thing because it's one of these things that got almost perfect reviews when it came out, but everyone was in sort of I love it camp or I hate it camp. Chrono Cross. I actually like Cross more than Trigger. I don't care what anyone says, I like Chrono Cross more than Trigger. To me, visually, just going by the visual aesthetics, this to me is probably the top two prettiest games on the PlayStation. Not just as far as the graphical prowess, but just the art direction this game took here. Incredible. It takes the Akira Toriyama work of Chrono Trigger and the visual style of that, and it creates an entirely new look of its own, but it doesn't feel foreign and separated and alien from that. It still feels like it belongs, and it does connect to Chrono Trigger in many different ways. I think the disappointment that people had was people were expecting to continue the story with those same characters and have a real just direct immediate sequel to Trigger, and I think that was a disappointment because I think there was a bit of a cloudiness there in the clarification of what this game was actually going to be and what its connections were going to be. But to me, just even all the elements that made Chrono Trigger so fantastic, I liked even better here. I liked going between the worlds and things, and it was such a remarkable experience that it's such a beautiful, haunting game and one of the best soundtracks a game has ever had. Just a remarkable experience and one of the most beautiful games ever. I love the battle system, and I love elements of it that I normally don't like in very many games. I don't like when you can choose between massive casts of characters. I've never liked that element of the Suikoden games. I never really got into that because I feel like a lot of times some of those characters don't have enough development and things. But within Cross, I actually liked that. I ended up liking certain parts of it that I thought I wasn't going to. It just was such a fantastic game, such a remarkable game. And over the years, I've actually become to appreciate it more and more as time went on. Number 22, one that I only had a chance to play recently, one I'd only played demos of and always wanted, but I never owned a copy. Skies of Arcadia on the Dreamcast. This is such an amazing RPG. When Xenoblade Chronicles 2 was first showing more and more gameplay, and they were showing the world of the Titans, and one of the things that drew me to it, aside from being a sequel to some fantastic games, was that it kind of visually had the Sky Sea element. Reminded me of Skies of Arcadia, and it doesn't play anything like that whatsoever, but just that visual cue just made me think back on Skies of Arcadia and how much I love that and how unique it feels just with its setting and the way it's pulled off, and it really just feels like you're flying through the sea, and is one of those elements of that if it wasn't in the sky, if you were just in water and they were regular islands, it really wouldn't play that differently, but it would lose a huge part of its magic. It's just one of those things where the setting, the imaginative elements of this game and what they did to elevate it beyond just being a standard like okay RPG, those few changes, those elements and those moments of creativity are what make this so genius. And I loved the dungeons, I loved every element of this game, so much of the world and the characters. It was just such a remarkable fun experience and really blew away my expectations because I always wanted this game and I always thought I was going to enjoy it, but I never expected to enjoy it to the level that I did, to enter my top 25 favorite games of all time. And it's easily one of my favorite games on the Dreamcast. I mean, just such a wonderful, wonderful game. And as far as just pure fun, I mean, sometimes with an RPG, you want those deeply engrossing, dark, complicated narratives. Sometimes you really want that. Sometimes you want like a Xenogears or like a Xenosaga trilogy, or sometimes you want like a deep political story, and other times you just kind of want a breath of fresh air and something that's fun, but while it doesn't have that extreme depth of detail, it still has just a wonderful, vibrant story and characters, and something that just has a genuine joy to it. It's something that you put in and you just feel happy, and you just feel excited, and you just feel like you're just having genuine fun playing through it, and really reminds me of why I want to play video games in the first place, to experience these new worlds in just a fun, creative way, and to be able to live for a time and experience, interact in a way in a totally different world, so different from my own, and just have a fun time doing it with lovable characters and a remarkable story. Number 21 is Parasite Eve 2, and this one was a little bit of a mixed experience for me when it first came out. I never had the same disappointment that I had with some things like Xenosaga Episode 2. I loved it from the beginning, but I wasn't very happy the first time I played it with the changes that they made. The first Parasite Eve felt like it had much heavier RPG elements, and largely in the combat mechanics too. That was one of the biggest changes. This felt like a fusion in many ways of the first Parasite Eve with a Resident Evil, with like a Dino Crisis, with the more traditional, at the time, survival horror, tank control type elements. It felt like a fusion of that with the first Parasite Eve, and for me it felt like a step back, because one of the most creative elements of the first Parasite Eve was that it was something a little more different, something had a little more of an RPG feel to it, and that made it a little more difficult for me to get into this at first, but over the years I've replayed it 3 or 4 times, and I love it more every single time I play it. It really is just a truly magnificent sequel to a fantastic Squaresoft game. The next two, number 20 and 19, are pretty much a tie, because it just is a game split in two in many ways. In many ways it's just a duology, a two-part thing, and I don't really think I like one more than the other by much. If I had to choose, though, I would say I like slightly Shin Megami Tensei Digital Devil Saga 1 a little bit more than 2, but they're really interchangeable. They're both the same. The 20 and 19 here spot here. These are amazing. I absolutely love these. I came off playing Nocturne at the time, playing these for the first time, and I loved the similarities to that, and I loved the differences too, and I loved the mythology that they go to. You don't really see a lot going on with Hindu mythology in big mainstream video games. It tends to be very Western focused or Japanese focused, or sometimes you get more of Chinese mythology. It's very infrequently that you get other mythologies really worked into the fantasy elements of a game, and these worked so well, and I loved the science fiction elements in this compared to some of the more fantasy elements in some of the other Shin Megami Tensei games that I was playing at the time. It felt like it was more in the sci-fi direction. I just got that vibe the whole time playing it, and remarkable. Some of the greatest storylines and interesting characters in that entire franchise, and of all the spin-off games and things like that, in that whole umbrella terminology of SMT. These are definitely some of the most just harrowing experiences that they have ever created. Some of the greatest Atlas games ever. Number 18, a PS1 RPG that was a game that kind of shook up my world because it rivaled my love of Squaresoft RPGs during a time where I was obsessed with pretty much everything that company came out with. Legend of Legaia. This is remarkable. This is my favorite turn-based battle system ever. It has just an incredible soundtrack, a beautiful world, some of the most memorable characters I've ever experienced. This trio here is just stuck with me for so long, and everything about this game, just I can picture the music in my mind at will, and the battle themes, like just every aspect of this game is just stuck with me so much. It's such a lovely game. It's such a it's a weird thing to say, but so much about it, it feels this in the way of Skies of Arcadia, where it's just kind of this fun, joyful RPG experience where I don't think it's going to be this overwhelmingly lengthy and complicated narrative. It's boiled down to the heart and the essence of what makes an RPG fantastic, and really pulls it off in such a memorable way. It really has the spirit of what's beautiful of RPGs at the time, and to me it's a personal timeless classic to myself. Not everyone's going to agree with that, but Legend of Legaia to me is something that has become a hallmark of RPGs for that era, and one of my favorites of all time. Number 17 is Final Fantasy X, the return of one of my favorite series on this list here. Final Fantasy X, so beautiful. Yeah, this shows why 10-2 is a little bit more of a disappointing sequel. It was much lower in this list. Final Fantasy X, number 17. I absolutely love this game. It was groundbreaking when it came out. I mean, it was just astounding. The visuals in this were remarkable, and I love the look of it, sort of the focus on some more like Okinawa, more of a tropical look then going into it, the mixtures of a very Shinto Japanese mythology mixed with something, again, more of a tropical feel to that religious element, that mystical, spiritual element was mixed with that more tropical feel of the setting. It felt like something very different, and especially coming off of the PlayStation trilogy of Final Fantasies, where you got more of a steampunky, more heavier sci-fi vibe from 7 and 8, and then you got more of a very traditional fantasy medieval stylings with Final Fantasy IX. This is something very different and really stood out from the rest of the series for me. Even since then, it's one of my favorite worlds to explore. Spira is just something that has always stuck with me. The first time I saw the trailer for Xenoblade Chronicles 2, I remember the one Titan in the very beginning of the game, so it's not really spoiling anything, that the one Titan that you see dying in the background. I was like, oh my gosh, it's Sin. It just looks like the Sky Whale, you know what I mean? It just had that visual memory for me. It's just something with the music and the story. I really felt for the characters so much in this, and I have always liked the voiceovers. I know there's a bit of a mixed reception with them from the time. It was the first time a Final Fantasy actually had voices for the characters, and to me, I think I have always liked it. I thought it was fine, and I just think it was such an incredible entry in that series, and one of the last RPGs that I put in for the first time and was just whisked away to a completely new world and didn't want to put it down, didn't want to take a break. It's one of those games where I wanted to experience it and just plow through the whole game, but at the same time, I never wanted it to end. I just wanted it to go on forever because I was so enjoying it and loving it, and it's one of those games I can constantly come back to. Just a beautiful, memorable experience. The next one only narrowly beats Final Fantasy X for the number 16 slot. They're pretty tight here, but Final Fantasy VI, and this is one I did play originally on the Super Nintendo, one of the very few games I played on that system fully on my own back in the day. But I actually have over time again come to like the PlayStation version a little bit more. That's the one I've replayed, and that's the one I came to love over time, and that to me is my favorite epic, my favorite magnum opus of the Super Nintendo. Having played in recent years more Super Nintendo RPGs, nothing has quite touched it. I mean, I think it comes down for a lot of people to Final Fantasy 4, 6, or Chrono Trigger. For me, I'm in the Final Fantasy 6 camp. I absolutely love that, and I think what they were able to accomplish both in music and storytelling within the limitations of something like the Super Nintendo is still just jaw-dropping and still just groundbreaking, and just to me it feels like the story of that is one of the best in the series and one of the most interesting and fascinating worlds, and those characters have always been just so captivating. And I mean, visually, I think I like Final Fantasy X, the one behind this, a little bit more. I think I like many ways the gameplay a bit more. There's so many elements I prefer, but when it comes to the story and the characters and the memories of the experience, I think there's an operatic beauty, and a good term to use for this one, an operatic beauty to Final Fantasy VI. Number 15, its sequel was just a few slots lower on this list, and partially because of some of the changes. We have the cinematic horror RPG, Parasite Eve. Anytime I hear the opening music to this game and that that pre-menu sequence starts, or CGI sequence, I just lose my mind. I absolutely get flooded with nostalgia, because this game haunted me in such a wonderful way, never in a truly scary way. That's the beautiful thing about the horror elements of this. It feels like just such a remarkable, fun horror survival RPG, but the horror elements of it just have this incredible beauty to them, where it's horrifyingly gorgeous. When you look at some of the gorier elements, the more horrific elements, you look at them and it's almost like a wonderful, beautiful, creepy, eerie painting come to life in so many aspects, and every element of this game is so enjoyable, and it's still one that I will constantly replay. And Parasite Eve in all its forms, the original book, the movie version, and then the very different, obviously, this version and the sequel, I really enjoy the ideas behind it about mitochondrial Eve, and I think it's such a fascinating way to tackle an interesting subject like that, and for that storyline, for those elements to be put in this style of game, is such a fun way of exploring that, and created such a remarkable and memorable experience that any change to that, any alteration from the way this masterpiece was put together, kind of lowers the quality a little bit in anything that tries to mimic it in some ways. And that's why Parasite Eve 2, as much as I love it, just the slight changes, the differences that draw away from some elements of the original Parasite Eve, or what put it a few slots lower, because the original Parasite Eve to me, I think, is an unequaled and unsurpassed game of its type. Moving on to number 14, Shin Megami Tensei III Nocturne, and to this day I still believe that this is one of the best looking video games ever created, especially for its dark, foreboding atmosphere. Everything about it feels like this thick mist of this weird, lurid, living world. It's such a bizarre artistic concept that I think goes into a deeper realm of surrealism than any game, even in this series before or since. I think there's something about the atmosphere and the feel of the world in here that just has such a foreboding, yet somehow alluring aura to it that's just so unique in the portrayal of the world and how you explore it. And I think a lot of that is the way the story is filtered through the world and through this atmosphere. It's never really thrown in your face. It's something where you actually have to kind of work in many ways to find the bits and pieces of the narrative to start to pull everything together. And even when you do that, it's really the way you combine everything and explore everything and the concepts that it brings up that really gives you the full picture of the story. So even once you start collecting all the tidbits and pieces of the narrative, it's almost like this living, changing world, and all these demons that you negotiate with and interact with and go into battle with, and all these different living and breathing and changing and fluctuating elements of this world are part of the narrative. So it's something that feels very alive and fluid in a way. It's a very interesting way of storytelling that I think is just done to such a perfect level here, and I've yet to see anything truly match the storytelling of this game in the style that it's presenting. There are games I think that have far better narratives, far better stories and characters, but I think for the style in which the story and world is presented in this game, nothing has really come close to that style and match the quality at the same time. It's also just one absolutely incredible badass dungeon crawler, my favorite dungeon crawling RPG ever, as far as something that I would consider to be more in that genre, my favorite by far in that. Just remarkable, and it's something where every element of the game, I think, comes together in such a beautiful piece that just has so much to think about. It's one of those games where I love just exploring and getting involved in it, just because what you take away from the game, the meaning that you get from it, really is how much you can really get absorbed into the game. It really isn't one where you can write out the story to this game, but it won't read the same way. It's something where I would enjoy and have enjoyed a manga or an anime version of something like a Persona game. I don't think I would really enjoy a version of that for this, because I think so much of the actual story is just involved in how you experience the game step by step, and it's such a fantastic title, and I've yet to see anything quite match it, even in this series. The next two I really want to talk about together, just because I feel like so much about why I love them is the same. Talking about why I like one a little bit more than the other. We have number 13, Persona 4, and number 12, Persona 3, and this is definitely my favorite version of 3. You have the vanilla release on PlayStation 2. There are some interesting benefits and unique qualities to portable. I really enjoyed that, but I don't think anything quite matches this version here on the PlayStation 2. Because of the post-game sort of mini sequel there, that's great, but also all the improvements they made from the vanilla version on PlayStation 2, I think this is just the perfect version. I think there are some elements of the exploration that are missing from the portable version, as well as how you interact with the environments and how that really kind of brings the world alive as you're exploring. But both of these here I love for so many of the same reasons. I like 3 just a little bit more because I felt a little more attached to the characters and the overall storyline, but I think that really just comes down to who you are as a person, and almost in a way the kind of friends and people you would have if you were in high school. I think that kind of determines in many ways which group of characters you like better in 3 or 4. I think that really is a reflection of your personal taste and the type of people that you would gravitate towards. So for me, overall, I like 3 just a little bit more because of that, and also with the setting. I do have to say that as far as being a part of the world and the community, in some ways I felt a little more comfortable and at home in 4, and I think that has a little bit more to do with the small town kind of country setting of the majority of the game. I think it has a unique and interesting comfort level there versus 3, but for 3, I think I got more involved with the main storyline overall compared to 4, so a little bit of give and take there. Both of them, what makes me love them so much and so brilliant, if you take away all of the day-to-day stuff, all the scheduled things, the school life, you take away the social links and you boil it down to all the RPG elements, dungeon crawler elements in here, and the main plot line, things like that, they would still be fantastic games that I think in those aspects would come close but not quite match both parts of Persona 2. I think they'd fall a little bit short of that. I just would like the cast of characters a little bit more in these. But it's those extra elements, that evolution of the series starting with 3 and moving on into 4, and what many people consider perfected in 4, that really set it apart. It's those elements that make me love these so much, because the core, hardcore, Shin Megami Tensei related RPG elements aren't watered down when these other things are added in, and that could have been a danger in creating this process. It just adds so much more. I love the social links, and I love all the different connections, because it really, again, makes you feel like you're living in this world and getting to know everyone so personally. I mean, there's so many storylines in some of these social link pathways of these quest chains that get you to really know the people behind the quest instead of just kind of faceless NPCs. It's almost little mini vignettes that you go on and really explore these stories, and a handful of them kind of hold their own emotional weight outside of the main story, and you really come to fall in love with this world and care about what happens to the main cast of characters because of the interactions with the world around them, the people around them. And there's also the addictive quality almost of going to school and doing all these activities, and you have a daily choice where pretty much every time you choose to do one thing, you're sacrificing the chance to do something else. And that makes me want to keep going back, because it's such a great time exploring these different stories and making these choices that I always want to, I'm always left wondering, what are these choices I didn't make, these avenues I didn't take, how much would I enjoy those, how much would that change my experience? And as far as replayability, I mean, these are 2 of my favorite RPGs ever because of those elements, and there are ones where I always have sort of a hankering to play one of these again just because of that, and being really a part of that world, and just unbelievably fantastic games. Number 11 is related to a game that really moved up the list over the years, because for a long time it didn't have a place on this list because I had not played it because of that game. The game that I'm referring to is Xenosaga Episode 2, and my initial experience with that, if you haven't watched this video, the video before this, go and check it out. I talk a lot about it, and how I've really come to like it more in recent years, but still have some issues with it. And finally, after getting through that a second time, I went and finally completed the trilogy just a couple of years ago. Xenosaga Episode 3, number 11 on this list of favorites of all time. A truly remarkable experience. It fixed the majority of my issues with 2. Not 100%, but so much to where the annoyances with 2, the elements that really drag down the experience, I feel like were really addressed in here to the point where it never really did that for me, and I was able to fully enjoy and love and experience the game. And if I had to pick one volume in this series that has overall the best story, I mean, obviously you have to have the whole trilogy to really get the whole picture, but as far as an individual episode, 1, 2, or 3, this might be my favorite overall as far as the story goes here. I think it is my second favorite for many other elements, as far as the visuals and as far as the gameplay and many other aspects. It would be my second favorite in the series, but just for the story by itself, it's my number 1, and a truly remarkable game. I think it takes what was actually good about Episode 2 and keeps that and makes it even better, and it takes everything that was a negative in moving from episode 1 to 2 and really fixes it to create a nearly perfect final chapter in this trilogy. And it is sad that we didn't get the second trilogy in a way. It was supposed to be 6 games, but this was kind of the wrap-up point for Xion and that element of the story, so you could almost call it like 2 trilogies. But again, it's still a fantastic wrap-up for an amazing trilogy, and I wish we had gotten more, but this is still a very, very satisfying way to end that story, and an incredible, incredible game, and one that I really want to see come back into light, because I feel like after episode 1, which had a greatest hits, sold very well, I feel like a lot of people have not experienced these games and as a trilogy, and they're kind of forgotten. I think now with the Xeno franchise name being so in the limelight and so popular now with the second party association with Nintendo and the success of the Chronicles games and things like that, I think now's the perfect time to bring these back in just a remaster form on the Switch. I think that would be my sort of dream Switch title, would be to see that would be in development, just a remastered trilogy, so people can love these games and explore them and just find them all over again. Number 10, I won't spend a lot of time on because I have hours and hours of content on this channel talking about this game, and I'm sure it's going to come up again this calendar year because the third game is coming out hopefully by the end of this year, I think by the end of this year. But number 10, Shenmue. What an incredible, incredible game. I talked about exploring and living and in the world in Persona 3 and 4, and how it just felt like a living, breathing world in so many ways, and the getting to know the individual people really made that come to life. That's fantastic in those games, but does not compare to Shenmue. For some reason, the environments in the world and the people that inhabit the worlds in both in Shenmue and Shenmue 2, unparalleled for me as far as the day in and day out aspects of life, and really feeling like you're just kind of living in that world and enjoying the mundane. I think it's one of the most special aspects of those games. But the first Shenmue is my number 10 of all time. My 9th favorite game of all time, Final Fantasy VII. This game is extraordinary. I was a fan of the Final Fantasy series before 7, but 7 is the one that made me into a super fan. Final Fantasy VII I blame for my Squaresoft obsession in the end of the 90s, where throughout the age of the PlayStation 1, I bought everything Squaresoft. I really enjoyed Bushido Blade before it, but then Final Fantasy VII was what made me, alright, if it says Squaresoft, I'm just buying it. This game's incredible. And it really deserves the love and the praise that it's gotten over the years. It really does. It's such a remarkable game, and one that every time I go back and replay it, I keep expecting to not like it quite as much, and I don't know why. I think it's because it's been almost so overhyped over the decades since it's been out that I feel like every time I go back to replay it, I expect the new experience to kind of tarnish the memory, and maybe it's just nostalgia, but it's not just nostalgia. I still love it the same every time I go back and replay it. It's such a remarkable game, and because I loved that so much, I could not wait to get my hands on Final Fantasy VIII, my 8th favorite game of all time, narrowly beating out 7. I just like it a little bit more. And interestingly, though, if you had asked me back in the end of the 90s, like when this came out, I would have told you I liked 7 more. It's just that over time, I've actually come to enjoy and appreciate 8 more than 7. I'm not sure why that is, but for some reason over the years I've really become more attached to 8, and it just has kind of switched places, the two of them, as far as my favorites. I've really come to love the look at and feel and the world of this game more over time. Number 7, Final Fantasy XII, a massive, beautiful world, the world of Ivalice. So many of the elements in the way you explore the world, it takes that MMO style and infuses it with the style of storytelling and the artistic direction of Final Fantasy Tactics. It really has more of that deeper, more politically driven storyline that I think is a bit of a departure from the way many of the stories are told in a typical Final Fantasy game, and I think that turns some people off, and I think the elements of the way it was played turned some people off in the beginning, and myself included. At the very first time I played it, I didn't quite like it. I thought it was unbelievably gorgeous, and I was enjoying the storyline, but I couldn't quite get into it. And re-experiencing it then, just a couple years after it first came out, I just absolutely fell in love with it, and I've come back and played it multiple times since then. Just a gorgeous, incredible game, one of my favorite game worlds of all time, one of my favorite cast of characters, and just from start to finish a nearly perfect game, and it's something where it's now my second favorite in that entire series. I really love Final Fantasy XII. I think it has by far one of the most fleshed out worlds in the entire series, and one of the greatest worlds to explore, almost in the same structure as something like Xenoblade Chronicles 1 or 2 now. It feels like the Final Fantasy version of that, and that structure and way of exploring the world, and it feels like such an amazing place to exist in. Number 6 is Shenmue 2, my Xbox copy here, my Japanese Dreamcast box set thing here. Unbelievable. To me, Shenmue 2 took everything that I loved about Shenmue, all the elements of storytelling, the true spirit of what those games represent. It took every piece of that game and just expanded upon it exponentially. It's not just bigger, and it's huge compared to the first Shenmue. I'd say even you can kind of break Shenmue 2. In my mind, I break it up into 3 parts, and even just the first part of that game is, in many ways, I spend more time in that than I do in all the first Shenmue game, just because I love to come back to that game, and I come back to it even more than the first Shenmue. I love the way it expands upon the story. I think the story gets deeper. You get introduced to more characters that I think I relate to in many ways. I think there's just so much more to it, and sometimes more is not always better, but it didn't lose the intimacy of Shenmue 1. It didn't lose that at all, even in these massive environments, in this much larger, more expansive world. There's so much more to do, so much more to explore, so much more to live through, and it really feels like you're living these games, not playing them. It really just brings you into that world, and it feels so real, and I think it's the biggest reason why I can't wait to play Shenmue 3, is just to re-examine that storyline and to be brought back into that feeling of it. It almost has a real world feeling, but at the same time there's this level of mystical spirituality throughout it that's almost magical, but at the same time the whole thing feels like it could and almost does exist in many ways. Number 5, my 5th favorite game of all time, is actually a newcomer, one that I was unbelievably hyped for. You've been watching my channel for more than a year or two. You've seen me go crazy over the reveal trailer and teasers and things, and I'm so glad it lived up to what I wanted it to be. And I did a whole video talking about my 40-minute video talking about my experience with this game, so I'll keep this one fairly short as well. But Xenoblade Chronicles 2, and I know a lot of people watching this were interested in seeing where this one lands, my wife included. I didn't tell her before I started making these videos where I was going to end up putting it, and I really tried to hide how much I loved it, because there are a couple small issues that I had with the game compared to the first Xenoblade Chronicles, but overall it didn't tarnish the experience at all. I fell in love with this game all over again. It has all the elements that I really, really want in a game, and I had such a great experience. And even when there were little pieces of it that I had issue with, it didn't matter, because the overall puzzle, the overall structure, we added all the pieces together, even if a few didn't quite fit, was such a glorious reveal, such an amazing experience, that I fell in love with the Xenoblade Chronicles style and structure and type of storytelling all over again. And it's just such a vast, magical world that I'm re-experiencing now. I have so many games in my backlog that I wanted to play, but I'm doing the New Game Plus on Xenoblade Chronicles 2 right now, and I'm probably not going to spend anywhere near the amount of time that I did in my first playthrough, just kind of really do a few side quest things I didn't do the first time that I felt like maybe I should have done, and go through and experience the main story again. Just kind of to relive that in many ways is why I'm doing a New Game Plus right away before I move on to new experiences. But yeah, my number 5 of all time, number 5 in the top 10, 2 Switch games already in the top 200 of all time. I am very surprised, because I'm very retro focused in many ways. My favorite generations of consoles are Gens 5 and 6 by a lot, and there's very little of Gen 7 in here. The only 2 Gen 8s are 2 Switch games, but yeah, within 3 months of owning the console, there are 2 games on the list. One of them is my number 5. Now we're into my top 4, and I kind of like to refer to this as the wall. This was the challenge when I was playing Xenoblade Chronicles 2. Can this match up to these top 4? These are the ones that I just hold on such a pedestal of just an unbelievable personal attachment to, something where I have trouble looking at these final four in any objective light. It doesn't matter. I just have so much passion for them, more than any other video game I've ever played. The hundreds and hundreds of games beyond these top 200. It doesn't matter. Nothing for me has even come remotely close to these four. Number 4, Xenosaga Episode 1. I spoke a lot about how Xenosaga Episode 3 in many elements was my second favorite in the series. That's because Episode 1 is my 4th favorite game of all time. This blew me away. When this came out, Xenogears was my favorite game ever. And when I found out when I first saw like a picture of this and then a review in a magazine, I was like, holy crap, is this really related to that glorious game? And I had to grab it right away, and I was not let down when I first played it, and I've replayed it so many times over the years. And the experience with that was exactly what I wanted at the time for a very science fiction focused RPG. I played it right after I'd played Final Fantasy X, which was very heavy in the fantasy elements, and this was very much the other way, and the way the story was told too. This is very complicated and detailed, and it's the kind of story where you have a dictionary of acronyms and things like that, and abbreviations of terminology, and I love getting into that type of meaty, complicated, and intricate content when it's not obtuse, when it's really just flows naturally, and it feels like that is how this world would be. This is how things would be structured and evolve over time. That is how this story should be told, and is exactly how this worked. And I love all the characters in here. I love everything about it from start to finish. Just such a remarkable game. There are only a few gaming experiences I've had that surpass it, and one of those would be my number 3 favorite game of all time, by far my favorite Final Fantasy IX. To me, this game is such a brilliant, perfect classic. If you boil down what makes a Final Fantasy game, what spirit was created in Final Fantasy 1 and has been built upon over time, what elements really, when you boil it down to its core crystal, what is a Final Fantasy game in its purest essence, and it's Final Fantasy IX for me in every respect. I really think it's just such a beautiful amalgamation of everything that came before it. All the classic elements of Final Fantasy 1 through 6, and then all of the greatness of 7 and 8. What made Final Fantasy 7, 8, and 8 extraordinary, and then what did they kind of lose in some ways in the classic sense of Final Fantasy, and you put that all together in this perfect pot, and it created this incredible, magical world. It really, to me, is the essence of what a fantasy game is. It's just absolutely perfect in my eyes. Final Fantasy IX, easily my favorite in that series, and I really think that is the crowning achievement. I don't think it's something that, of course, I don't think will ever be touched by that series. I think it's gone in a completely different direction, something very, very different in recent years, and nothing before it. I think everything before it, was building up to this. I think this was the pinnacle, the crowning achievement of both Square as a company, and both the original creators of that series and everyone involved in the heart of Final Fantasy. I think this was kind of like the magnum opus, and something that I think should be treasured forever. My second favorite game of all time, one that was my favorite for over a decade, and one that tells a very different story. It's almost a polar opposite to Final Fantasy IX. Xenogears, incredible. This was my number 1 for so long. It's my number 2 now, and it still holds up in every way. Every time I've gone back and replayed it over the years, it's almost, sometimes I haven't played it quite as often as I would like to, because it's almost a draining experience. It's so heavy, because every time I play it, I can never do just kind of a casual, fun playthrough. I just get so emotionally invested in it, and so much of it is so heavy and detailed and complex, and even though I've played it multiple times, I always find myself kind of reanalyzing it in my mind as I'm playing, and it takes so long for a playthrough because of the way that I just naturally want to re-experience it, that I don't play it quite as often as I would like to. But every time I do come back to it, it holds up in every way to everything I want from a video game from that era. To me, it was the pinnacle of gaming as a whole, until something surpassed it, and I was not expecting it to surpass it in any ways. I thought this would be number one forever, but it is my number two because just a few years ago now, I guess, what has it been, 5 years? 5 years, a little over 5 years, almost 6 years now, something came and beat it, Xenoblade Chronicles on the Wii. And the one thing I can say about Xenoblade Chronicles, to really sort of sum up everything I love about it, because it's the type of game where I've never done an actual review on it because I don't know how I could do it in a concise manner, and I really just don't think I could explain how much I love this game in something that's less than like a 4-hour odyssey, and going through every little detail and explaining all the emotional and mystical and thought-provoking and almost spiritual elements of this game that shine through and have affected my life in such a strong way. I feel so passionately about this, as passionate as I do about any form of art that's ever been created, any form of music, any great, amazing film, any amazing book that I've experienced over the years. This has affected me as much as anything in any other medium, and it's just an incredible, it was almost a life-changing experience, really. It's something you talk to anyone who's close to me, and they'll tell you, like, you said, what's your favorite game? Well, obviously this. Like, I can't stop talking about it and how much I love about it. And I think the one kind of sentence that I could say to summarize all of that and end this here is the first Xenoblade Chronicles here on the Wii, this game right here. If everyone in their mind has a different interpretation of what makes games perfect. Everyone who has played video games as any form of art, everyone takes something individually from those games and wants something a little bit different, and that's why you can never please everyone. There's no such thing as a perfect game, because everyone's idea of what is a perfect game is different, as different as everyone is in the world. And when you come down to the elements that would create my perfect video game, if I could create, money was no object, technology was no object, there were no barriers. If I created the perfect game in as far as my vision of the perfect game and what I would want, Xenoblade Chronicles is almost exactly that vision. It's something that when I was first playing it, I didn't realize that that's kind of what I've been searching for, and playing all these games and hundreds of games and thousands of hours and decades of my life. The one thing I think we're always searching for in a game is that perfect vision, even if we haven't defined it yet. And I really realized that when this game is so close to being exactly what I want from a video game. It's that I always say the only thing that's missing from my absolute perfect vision is mechs, is some sort of like mobile suit or something like that, which is why I really want a Wii U, because I really want to experience Xenoblade Chronicles X. I haven't had a chance to yet. But yeah, this is almost exactly my perfect vision of the perfect video game. And it's such a remarkable experience, and that's what made me so excited for Xenoblade Chronicles 2 when it was coming out, but it's also what had me a little bit concerned when I was first playing it, and it wasn't quite living up to that, because I don't think anything can. Yeah, these are my favorite video games of all time, the ones I'm the most passionate about, and I hope hopefully you've enjoyed this journey with me, these hours and hours. I know these videos are so long, but as a content creator, I want to create the type of content that I would like to watch and I would enjoy, and for me, I just wouldn't find it as interesting of just kind of a bunch of numbers and flashing, 299.98 in like a 15-minute video going through all of it. I really think that the idea behind doing a video like this is to share the reasons why and the passion and the journey that brought me to each one of these experiences. I think that's as important as just listing, a list of my favorite games, why and what leads you to that, and really to get the point across too that everyone's list of favorite games is going to be completely different, because it's all dependent upon not just the experience you had, but how you experienced it, when in your life you experienced it, and what surrounded it. Everything is beautiful within a certain context, and nothing will appeal to everyone. These are my absolute favorite games of all time. Extraordinary. And I'd love to hear what some of your favorite games are. Another thing I would really like is if you have a favorite game that was not on this list and you think it's related to any of these, if you think that, like, wow, if he really likes that, he would probably like this, let me know. That would be great. I would love for this series to open up some avenues of some games I never considered or never heard of or anything like that. That would be fantastic. I would love to find something like that and have that maybe make the list in a future video, who knows. But thank you for taking this journey with me, and thank you for watching my channel over the years and having so much fun with me, and I hope that things will continue just to get better and better and more fun in the future, and happy gaming.